Pentagram, dedicated to Henry Foreman. In the years of the primal force and the dawn of terrestrial birth, men...
Hey! Come on. Face of the goat in the mirror, eyes burn like an October sunrise, as once they gazed upon the hillside, searching for the memories. In the shadow of the horns, only seen by the kings, of the dawn of the first millennium, upon the thrones. In the shadow of the horns, cleansed like the air in the night, world without end. World without end indeed, my friends. I'm Alan.averill, this is Agitators Anonymous. Who knows what goddamn episode it was? That was In the Shadow of the Horns, from A Blaze in the Northern Sky by Dark Throne. A little bit of Norwegian black metal lyricism to start off today's episode. And what will this episode be? Well, I suppose as a little companion episode to last week's report from Beyond the Gates Festival, and after a little discussion between quite a few people at the festival, including Torgrim recently, just what are the most underrated, maybe underappreciated, hidden gems from the Norwegian black metal scene from back in the day, and, you know, kind of in black metal adjacent, let's say, as well. And it got me thinking. A couple of us were having these debates while we were there. Of course, we all know what are the prime movers when it comes to talking about Norwegian black metal. I will reveal my favourite ones at the end of the podcast, just to create a little element of non-existent suspense. But I just thought I would dredge my memory and go back and try and maybe consider 10 underrated, underappreciated records and some honourable mentions. I'm a man who loves a good list. I love a goddamn list. When I was a kid, well, not even as a kid, I'm obsessed with top 10s, top 20s, 30s, 40s. Sometimes, you know, there's this thing you can go and find online. It's like a top 40 generator, and you can go back and you can go, tell me the top 40 of the UK album charts in September the 10th, 1981. And I will spend ages going over the top 40, etc., etc. I'm obsessed with record sales. I suppose you could say obsessed a little bit with numbers. Read into that what you will. So the idea of a top 10, I've resisted it mainly with the podcast. You know that there aren't many BuzzFeed style top 10 this, or, you know, metal blah 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 website, top 10, top 12 this, top 13 Norwegian black metal albums, whatever. It's kind of easy content to make, and I have to admit it does appeal to me, but I've tried to not really go down that route. But I think after 120 episodes, you will allow me a small incursion into the realm of creating a top 10. Actually, you know what? It's not even really a top 10. It's a sort of vague mention of 10, 11, 12 records that I think maybe don't get enough love or respect or tender love and care as maybe they could have or should have. Records that were back in the day, I suppose, regarded, but for some reason have fallen from grace, perhaps. I don't know. I'm not really too sure. However, we'll get into that. A little bit of housekeeping first, and that is that if you want to support the show, go over to patreon.com/alan.averill, which is, you know, there's bonus podcasts, there's rehearsals, there's behind the scenes video, this of that, of rehearsals and live shows and all sorts of other random stuff. Mainly at the moment, lots of arguing about what crypto means, as I am a sort of novice about the whole thing. Old man shouts at clouds would be a fair definition of my understanding of the whole thing. Anyway, go over and take a look. There are no tiers. Follow me on _Primordial for my rather dull, if acerbic adventures on the gram, or Primordial_official, and you can see what's going on with Primordial these days. All that kind of thing. The show is sponsored by metalblade.com, especially in North America. You can use the promo code ALAN to get 10% off your order. Considering now that you've probably seen Merciful Fate this summer, you probably need to go back and reorder some of those old Merciful Fate records, and especially the 90s records, which if you've looked at my YouTube channel, you will find I've done a deep dive into Merciful Fate and a lot of talking about those 90s records, especially In the Shadows and Time. Great records, like really solid records. Now is the time to pick them up on vinyl reissues. Go and check out the links below. You can also find a link to a best of Metal Blade 80s playlist that I made, amongst various other things. Go and take a listen. So, there you have it. Now, let's have a little look at what I consider to be 10, 11, 12, we'll see, underrated Norwegian black metal and black metal adjacent records. They're in no particular order, and I've not done an incredible amount of research here, so if you happen to have played on one of these records, or a record I don't mention, you're going, why goddamn it, Averill? I'm not sure why you'd have that accent, but you know, if you were, well, I do apologise. My first one is Carpathian Forest, Through Chasm Caves and Titan Woods. That's the name of the first EP by Carpathian Forest. And this really is my favourite release by the band. It includes two really strange songs. I think it's The Pale Mist Hovers Towards the Nightly Shores, and I think it's Through Journey Through the Cold Moors of Svartjorn, which are it's almost like acoustic, kind of dark wave film soundtrack movements. And then the other two or three more kind of Celtic Frosty style, grim black metal songs. And it's really the first two that sort of really struck me as something very strange and very different. I was a big fan of the demo, whatever the fuck the demo was called, Journey Through the Woods of Siasora or something, or I probably could have looked that up, couldn't I? Yes, it was actually called Journey Through the Cold Moors of Svartjorn, and it's strange because those two songs, when I ordered the Carpathian Forest demo from Nordavind, he just tagged onto the recording at the end of the demo, and then they just reappeared on this EP. I think it represents a very interesting part of Carpathian Forest's history, and it made a big impact on me at the time. It was a really strong EP that I think no one really talks about anymore. It's on Avant-Garde Music, who were a brilliant label out of Italy at the time. They had so many good bands and so many killer releases. But it was before the band got sort of G.G. Allen-ish, sort of S&M-y, sort of scuzzy, sleazy. It's really before all that stuff took hold. I think the next album after this is Black Shining Leather, because they disappeared for a couple of years, and I think Not to Frost and Nordavind parted ways. But this first EP is a sort of great mixture of really primitive black metal, a little bit of Frost and Hellhammer, something very cold about it. But those two instrumental kind of soundscape songs are really pretty special. I don't know how it's been re-released, or I don't know anything about it. I'm looking at my vinyl copy of it here from Avant-Garde Music back in the time. Killer artwork. The kind of logo fits in really well. I used to have a demo shirt somewhere or other that I think I traded with Neil from Cacophonous. Neil, if you're listening, give me back that goddamn shirt. I'm not sure what I traded it for, but it's pretty sure it was something to do with Bathory or Venom that he had lying around in a shelf from 1984. Who knows if I still have that, but certainly the first EP by Carpathian Forest, Through Chasm, Caves and Titan Woods, is my first proposal for an underrated Norwegian black metal record. The second on my list is a band that I think overall deserves an awful lot more love, and that's Gehenna. Not Gehenna with a H from Sweden, but Gehenna. First Spell was a really important EP at the time. On Head Not Found Records. They released an EP before that. What was it called? Black Seared Heart, I think. No, Ancestor of the Darkly Sky. And it was this sort of mid-paced, quite grim, almost sort of ploddy kind of black metal, but with this sort of ethereal keyboard thing over the top. And a really great ice-cold voice. Looking here on their Wikipedia, goddamn, they've some amount of members. But, you know, Sanrab and Dolgar and all these names, and my old friend Per on the drums. Yeah, Seeing Through the Veils of Darkness, the second spell, is the first full-length album by Gehenna. A vinyl LP version limited to 1,000 copies, released in 95 by Necromantic Gallery Productions. Wow, Necromantic Gallery actually offered Primordial a contract. I think it was the first actual record contract I got. And before, I think there was some discussions with Candlelight, some discussions with Cacophonous and a few others. But Necromantic Gallery was the first time that I actually just received a kind of formal offer in the post somewhere around 94, 95 maybe. Early 95, maybe the end of 94. And it was really quite a big thing. The kind of thing where you got on the phone straight away and said, I've got to ring Kieran and talk to him about this and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, read him out the entire contract over the phone and what are we going to do, etc., etc. But Seen Through the Veils of Darkness is a great record. It's I'm not really one for orchestral, keyboard-orientated black metal. And that's not really what was going on with Gehenna. And the riffs were kind of ice cold, sort of. I've used that now twice. I need to think of some other analogies. Just really great melodic riffing structures, but with the keyboard kind of sits slightly back. It's kind of ethereal sounding. The whole vibe of Gehenna is this sort of ghastly, sort of funereal kind of atmosphere. And at the time, I remember there was a big tour. I think they did it with Cradle of Filth, maybe in 95. They really were a band that were on the way up. I remember seeing posters for the band everywhere when I went to London on my first trip to Europe. They were a band that were really kind of just under that first tier of bands in Norway, the underneath the Mayhems and Emperors. And whatever happened to the band since then, they've of course released new albums, but I think they just sort of retreated to live on an island somewhere and did a few other things with their life and kind of left Gehenna settle in the dust a little bit. I did see them on tour about 5 years ago. We played a gig with them in Poland. I think they were with Take. And yeah, they sounded great. But those first few records do have something magical about them. I suppose that's the cliche. But definitely, Lord of Flies, Vinterricket, A Witch is Born was the kind of hit, I suppose, at the time. I suppose they were the band's band within that kind of early keyboard orientated, almost vampiric sounding black metal. The band's band were Gehenna. Anyway, it makes a perfect companion actually to the principle of evil made flesh, I would propose. Third on my list is Aternus, a band that I suppose were also in a sort of parallel world to Primordial back in the day, along with Tyrfing and Septic Flesh and Ancient Rites. We were all kind of on Hammerheart Records at a certain period in time. And again, a band who are still releasing records. I can see they have an album from 2018 on Dark Essence Records. The last few were on Dark Essence Records. But their time where I suppose they had the most impact was specifically, and I played this when I was DJing in Beyond the Gates, is the Dark Sorcery EP. This is I don't really think there's much black metal that sounds like this. It's down-tuned almost to a sort of realm of chaos tuning. I don't know exactly what it is, but the sound is very brutal for Norwegian black metal. It's totally in opposition to most of the middly, trebly, high-pitched sort of frozen north kind of tropes that you would expect from the Dynamics. It's very dense and bass-heavy. And nothing really sounds like Dark Sorcery, and still to this day I don't think really does. The debut album Beyond the Wandering Moon 97 is great, but it's the second album, And So the Night Became, 1998 Hammerheart Records, that I think is little short of a masterpiece. Certainly it was an album that we really, really liked with Primordial at the time. All of us around 98, 99 listened to it a lot. I think I may have even stolen the line, I Have One Desire, which actually is from, I think it's from Shakespeare or something, some play, but it turned out Aternus had used it a year before we wrote the song Gods to the Godless. I don't know if that's something subconscious going on there. I'm not really too sure. Either way, this album, And So the Night Became, is a huge sounding record. Great drum sound, big open bass end, very brutal vocals, but just a very dense, big tone. And let me just have a look here. Now, because I'm pretty sure it was recorded by Python, and it proves the worth of the studio when every album that comes in and out of Greek Helen has a different tone and sound. That is the worth of an engineer, I think, who doesn't necessarily try and impose their sound upon the band, but interprets the band's sound to the best of their ability, is part of the process. Processes their tone, because certainly Dark Sorcery has an incredibly brutal tone. After that, I think the band toured with some death metal bands and maybe became influenced a bit too much by the Cannibal and the Deicides of the world. But those triplet of releases, Dark Sorcery, Beyond the Wandering Moon, and So the Night Became, especially, I would recommend to anybody. I think they're actually, in a way, what pagan metal should be. The essence of pagan metal. It's dark stuff. So certainly Aternus and So the Night Became is my third choice. My fourth choice will be Hades Almighty, or Hades as we just knew them. This is what I would hope that maybe if someone looked up in a dictionary somewhere and looked up pagan metal in the heavy metal lexicon, they would come across the album Hades Again Shall Be, because that to me is the sort of traditional, or once upon a time, definition of what pagan metal actually was. I mean, pagan black metal, whatever you want. 1990, 94, Full Moon Productions, American label, who had tons of bands. I don't really remember what happened to them, but the Alone Walking demo, 1993. Wounded Love Records, wow, yeah, they were cool. There was Ras Al Gethi and all sorts of cool bands on Wounded Love, making me nostalgic for that 93, 94 era. But Hades was using clean vocals as well, and they were one of the first bands Primordial went on tour with a little bit for 4 or 5 shows in maybe 99, and we were big fans of the Again Shall Be album. It says here they have a split with Catatonia. I don't think I've ever seen that. 1996. Dawn of the Dying Sun was the second one in 97. I didn't like that one as much. But the opening album has got huge, big battery toms. It's got clean, type layered backing vocals. It's got this very harsh bass tone, harsh vocals, but it's epic. It's huge sounding record that takes its cues from Hammerheart and all that kind of stuff. And it really is, again, an example. There are, how can we say, there are examples of bands throughout the years who managed to curate their career, let's say. We're all young back in the day, and sometimes you make decisions that don't pan out. And of course, life gets in the way of being in a band. I mean, surely, I know that. I think that within Primordial, there are certainly, I was the guy who was up the front driving things along, and, the least talented guy, the least creative guy, but the one who was pushing and driving all the time. And sometimes you need different people in the band to have different roles. One needs to be the agitator, the guy who's out kind of pushing for all these other things, because other people are just creative people who don't want all of the hassle. And there are bands who are just all of those kind of people who then, we have kids, families, and people then, before you know it, 5-10 years has gone by and you haven't made an album and all that kind of thing. And careers can, dust can settle on them and they can be put on the shelf by scenes as scenes change. And some of the bands I'm mentioning here, something like that seems to have happened. And it's unfortunate because many of them are still making really great music. I mean, Pyre Era was the last EP by Hades Almighty, and it's cool. It's really worth looking into. However, what I'm talking about is Again Shall Be. It's a huge record. I presume somebody has re-released it on double vinyl with a huge poster with Alone Walking on the other side of it and all this kind of stuff. But that's my fourth choice, Hades Almighty. In fifth. Well, and it's not really a 1 to 5 list, but I'm trying to mentally keep myself from going, I'm in 10th, and say it twice. But it's Arcturus and My Angel. I was never a huge Arcturus fan of the things that happened afterwards, but My Angel, the very first EP, which I think is 91 or 92, I loved and still love. It's a kind of creepy, very odd, strange record. And there's quite a few bands like this. Also band Strid, who End of Life, I think, is the name of the 7-inch. Deserve a mention. There was some unusual bands back then, and they weren't all pop, 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 pop. They weren't all harsh, super fast sounding stuff. There was quite a lot of creepy, ghostly kind of sounding records. And certainly My Angel, I think it was on Thrash Records from France or Sedex or something like this, which a friend of mine borrowed. I think I had the green covered version, green or blue, borrowed and never quite gave back. But definitely Arcturus My Angel had quite a big influence on Primordial. I think our first recorded song is 92, The Darkest Flame, and I think there's an element of Arcturus My Angel in that song somewhere. Quite what it is, I'm not too sure, but certainly it was something we were listening to a lot of back in the day, and that I'm not like I said a big fan. Constellation was a great EP afterwards, I think I remember, but after that, La Masquerade Infernale, I'm not really into whatever that became. Some people love it, that's fine, but it's really the very first Arcturus My Angel that really made a pretty huge, pretty big impression back in the day. Now, Sixth is a band who apparently, I only discovered this today, their original member died recently. So condolences to him and his family, but it's Forgotten Woods. A band who at the time I remember kind of stood out like a sore thumb in the Norwegian scene. And I think even within Norway they were kind of shunned by the traditional black metal people. I'm pretty sure they were from some town that was really out of the way or not part of the general black metal milieu. Maybe it was because they were on No Colours Records, I don't know. Maybe they didn't go, join the correct label or something. Putrefy Productions, I don't know. But As the Wolves Gather, definitely. At the time, it did make a huge impression on me. I had a friend, a girl I knew, who loved them, worshipped them even, wearing Forgotten Woods t-shirts all the time. And it was kind of like a bit of a, oh, God, look at their silly logo, their squiggly logo. Looks like it was made by a little 12-year-old, etc., etc. For some reason, I don't know what it was. They didn't quite fit in to everyone's view of what black metal was. But listening back today, just going back over some of their stuff, and definitely this As the Wolves Gather album has this sort of tone of suicidal black metal, which Bethlehem inhabited as well, but bands like Shining and stuff I think certainly took an influence from it. And I would recommend going onto your Spotify and playing the song Dimension of the Blackest or Grip of Frost, for example. It's powerful stuff, it's strong stuff, it's lo-fi, there's no doubt about that, but it's got great sort of dark, this suicidal black metal riffing, proto-suicidal black metal, because I think this was kind of before all of that stuff. And Forgotten Wolves definitely, I think, is really a band that at the time maybe they were a bit ahead of their time. I don't know. I don't really know what ahead of their time means, because certainly it doesn't sound ahead of its time, but definitely a band who are worth some more investigation. There's no doubt about that. So I think I'm on 7 now. Well, this is going to be Kvist. I spoke about Kvist, I think, before. They made one album, excuse my butchery of the Norwegian language, for Kunsten Ma Vi Evig Vike. I'm sure that has some of you rolling in the aisles. But this was, again, a great release from Italian label. I just mentioned them with Carpathian Forest. You can go back and listen to them. Roberto Marmarella from Monumentum. He ran the label. And this was a very avant-garde music. Sorry, my brain. Come on, brain, let's go. This is a very interesting record. It has a very unusual production, very upfront kind of drum sound. It came out in 1996, the beginning of 1996. Interesting kind of minimalist cover with a sort of stone circle on the front, if I remember correctly. Not really even a logo. I don't know if there was even any members, maybe one member. Quite secretive and quite sort of secretive. It says they're from the town of Hanafoss, Viken, I don't know what that means. Never even heard of the place. And the band pictures are generally just one guy wearing corpse paint. The music is quite different to that. It does remind me a little bit of The Shadow Throne by Satyricon. But it's got a sort of more pagan, sort of earthy kind of vibe to it. Great record, really, really great record. And I think re-released recently on vinyl, of course, as everything has been. But KVIST, I think it means twig in Norwegian, which isn't the most awe-inspiring or fear-inspiring name you can have. I'll twig you in the eye. But the record is great. It's, I suppose, somewhere between Satyricon and the next band I'm going to talk about, which will be In the Woods, which will be my 8th choice. In the Woods are still around playing, even though I think I don't think there are any original members left. I saw In the Woods with 96 with Catatonia. Me and my friend put on a show for them in Dublin. Hilarious show. I think I've talked about it in the podcast before. We stayed up all night making bags of sandwiches, and there was no stage, no real lights, but it's a kind of one of those were you there moments in the Irish metal scene of the 1990s. About 250 or 300 people showed up or something. I'm sure he's sitting listening going, no, it was 236 or whatever, but it was kind of one of those seminal moments where two underground bands actually made it to Ireland. Now, I'm sure the bands weren't right happy at having to kind of stand on a 1/2 foot high stage, but the show went off. I remember it was fucking cool. And In the Woods, for a band who never really had any band photos, they were such an oddball bunch on stage. Kind of one guy wearing a Hawaiian t-shirt, oval, Svithjod Overlord, Jan Kenneth I think his name was, singing, cut a curious figure, very sort of looked like he'd been just on holiday to somewhere in the Near East or something. And I used to write a lot with him back in the day, and then he just disappeared. I think he had enough of the metal scene, had enough of everything, and just decided, I'm out. And I kind of respect that within some people, that they've done their bit, they've had their fill. In the Woods made 3 great records, but the first one that I'm going to just kind of talk about here is Heart of the Ages. It's a brilliant record, and again, just like Hades Again should be considered one of the final words when it comes to what pagan metal is. I suppose some of you are going, oh, you're not really talking about Norwegian black metal. Well, like I said, black metal adjacent, because certainly the original demo Isle of Man had lots of sort of Burzum influences in the vocals and lots of sort of black metal riffs. But Heart of the Ages, 1995, the first song, Yearning for the Seeds of a New Dimension, is Stonewall classic. Whole album is classic. Omnio is the second album, again classic. Strange in Stereo I liked less, but it's still a really good record. They're still going, as I said, but it's kind of no original members. And they've had their ups and downs over the last couple of years. But I saw them at Carmorgeddon, and they seem to be on the way back up again. It was a pretty decent sounding show, to say the least. But Heart of the Ages represented this sort of mystical, rare, unusual kind of record. It had an element of the other about it. It was part of the Misanthropy Records stall, again, which Primordial was for, with one album, Journey's End, which I'm quite proud of, that we were part of some of the institution of non-conformity that Misanthropy Records kind of represented back in the day. And In the Woods, Heart of the Ages was a big player in that record label's structure, a big pillar of it stood out like a sore thumb in the black metal scene at the time. But just looking, mourning the death of Asa, Wotan's return, Pigeon, don't ask what's going on there, but hey, the Divinity of Wisdom, the In the Woods, Heart of the Ages is without a doubt a absolute Stonewall classic, pagan, black metal, whatever you want to call it. I think they've been re-released on vinyl again. I say this after everything, but I'm pretty sure they have, and I would recommend anyone into epic sort of music to get hold of them. Get hold of these records. They're absolutely staggering, especially this first one. And I'm feeling now like I need to go and put it on after this and take a listen. Go and, you'll find it on Spotify. Get some headphones, some good headphones, and go and take a walk in the forest and listen to Heart of the Ages and see if it does it for you as you're walking among the trees. That's kind of what we did when we're, 19 years old, and it made total sense. It made total sense. So I suppose I should talk about a bit of real black metal, shouldn't I, really? And I'm going to mention the first Gorgoroth album, Pentagram, came out on a French label, if I'm not incorrect, that I cannot remember the name of. Let me just click on this, that, and the other. There's a Gorgoroth from the Philippines. Who knew? Anyway, yeah. Pentagram. It was released by Embassy Productions from France. Just a logo. Limited edition CD. Okay, 1,000 copies. Wow, okay. Well, I possess one of those. Don't have it on vinyl. Somebody wants to offer me one. Oh, it's perfectly fine. A Sorcery Written in Blood was a demo from 93, which I really, really was into. I really loved the kind of scummy, battery kind of black metal vibes. I don't know where that demo is, actually. But yeah, I used to write with Aternus and all that kind of thing. But Pentagram had a really big impact. I just really enjoyed the simplistic violence of those early riffs, but yet tinged with the sort of melodic element. And what was this last song? Cathar, Manaskugens, Slava. I thought was a absolutely classic track, Crushing the Scepter. And in all things considered, I was a fan of Under the Sign of Hell, Destroyer. I quite enjoyed Incipit Satan as well. And Ad Majorem Satanas Gloriam, I thought had great riffs, even though that's a kind of divisive thing. It's the other Gorgoroth, so to speak. Nothing to do with any of that. But I still thought there were great riffs on that. So I suppose it's hardly really worth calling Gorgoroth an underrated band, or an undiscovered gem or something like that, when you consider it against names like Strid, or, just off the top of my head, Take, Urgahal, Ornoir's first EP was great. We're talking about Molested, Fester, etc., etc. All these names from back in the day. Carpathian Full Moon. Who doesn't deserve Perdition Hearse, whatever, all these names popping into my head now. But certainly that first album, I think, is a really classic in the genre of just really primitive, orthodox black metal, uncompromising, no bullshit, fist in the face, just harsh black metal. That I don't know quite what happened to all the other members. The singer, I think, came back for a little bit and then left again and all that kind of stuff. But definitely Pentagram, I presume, of course, like everything else, it's been re-released on a vinyl somewhere, and that it should be easy enough to find. But hey, who knows? That's up to you. Happy searching. So in the last place, well, just before we get to the last record that I'm going to mention, I'm going to give an honourable mention to Dodans Guard, Monumental Possession, the second album, which kind of got lost in the mix somewhere. I was not a huge fan of Krone Tilkonga, or whatever it's called. But the second one, which slipped under the radar, I pulled back out and had to listen to when I was thinking about this. And yeah, it's great black thrash. It really gave me a kick in the bollocks. More black than thrash, but it's a solid record. I was not a huge fan of where they went after that. Kind of lost my way with them. But certainly the Monumental Possession, we can hardly call Enslaved underrated, but certainly Hordane's Land, the first EP, the split with Emperor, I think deserves an awful lot more love, and it deserves its place as one of the, I guess, the great early 90s black metal, or pagan black metal, whatever you want to call it, EPs. It should be up there. Maybe it is already. I don't know. It's a long time since I heard anybody talking about it, but the artwork was killer. The logo, it had this windswept, earthy, kind of dark vibe to it. That one of the things that I've said in the the Hole in the Sky the Beyond the Gates podcast was that when all the hurly-burly's done and all the things are said and all the nonsense is talked, at the end of the day, when somebody says, well, did that scene have the music to back it up? The answer is in spades, yes. 1,000 times yes. No matter what you want to say about Norwegian black metal, about where it went in the late 90s or where it is now 20 years later, that period, there's so many great and incredible records. It's kind of difficult to quantify how many people, and how many very young people, were out there making incredible records. And, I'll give This one is going to be enslaved. Yeah, Hordane's Land. I mean, can be in. Is it 10th place? Maybe, maybe not. And all of those records, and like all the other ones I've mentioned, there's another 5 or 6 or 7 bands that I've forgotten the names of, who also released good records at the time. But those are 10 releases that I think probably maybe need more of an investigation or more of a dig out, or they need, a little bit more of a, a vinyl hunt down, or whatever you want to say. So I realise this is becoming more of a dirty dozen, or I don't know, 13 disciples, whatever you want to say, 13 candles, 13 something or other than a 10, because I've realised I've got a couple more things I need to mention. The first one is Beyond Dawn. I suppose it roughly comes in under the rubric of sort of post-black metal. I don't know. I guess at the time, and I'm talking about the album Pity Love, which is one of my favourite Norwegian records, and they turned into something a little bit different after that with Revelry and Pity Love and stuff. But Longing for Scarlet Heavens could be the first EP. Not sure. Anyway, Pity Love is a great record. It has a sort of Swans kind of vibe to it, even though at the time I would say that I didn't really know the Swans. But they really have to... I don't think I could really do this list without mentioning it. They made a couple of albums after that, but it's really Pity Love, I think, that really made a pretty big impact. I'm sure it's been re-released, as I've said, after every one of these, and you should go and track it down. I'm going to have to give honourable mentions to Take, Helheim, Isvind, Ildjarn popped into my head as I was looking through my 7 inches. They had a very cool sort of uncompromising style that I think bands like Hate Forest kind of copied a little bit. Nijog Ildjarn, I think, was the name of the split. Also Manes, Tulas. Yeah, there's lots of bands. I actually liked this Manos album Philosophy quite a lot. But there's a couple of records before that that are worth mentioning as well. But mentioning Mysticum, never really my favourite band. I was not too much into the sort of electronic drum machine kind of sound. But they definitely were doing something original back then. And maybe you've seen some of their, quite frankly, astonishing shows over the last couple of years. But I suppose, without a doubt, Mysticum is worth a mention. Streams of Inferno. I would also give some of the early Gal material a mention. That's Treldom. There were a couple of albums, especially one that a friend of mine used to always play at 3 a.m. at our kitchen table, drinking parties, and we all had a big heavy metal house together just to try and ruin the rock and roll vibe. Once you knew Treldom was coming out, that was the end of everything. Anyway, yeah, definitely worth a mention, Treldom. So I was feeling pretty pleased with myself. I realised I had... you have this episode done and dusted, time to put your feet up. And then I forgot that I realised that I forgot Vedwenzende, Those Who Crest the Pale demo, and Written in Waters album. I saw them back maybe in 98. There are only 2 shows in the UK, which, were kind of a bit disastrous or crazy for a multitude of reasons. I seem to remember we stayed in the same place and everyone got super sick. And I think this really put obviously some sort of down with the sickness type downer on proceedings. But anyway, yeah, Vedwenzende, a really exceptional band, odd, unusual, bit of Voivod, bit of 70s kind of prog, psych maybe in there somewhere, kind of dissonant, odd stuff. It did reach for the other, which as young men can often mean something pretentious. But it made no airs and graces to, I suppose, wanted to ascend to that kind of application. And yeah, Vedwenzende, Written in Waters, a really unusual record, Misanthropy Records, that I would recommend. And I've had to go back in and re-edit to mention it. So there you go, my friends. And yeah. I suppose it's about time that I mention my 5, I suppose, or whatever you want to call it, choices from, what would we call it, the top tier, or the expected, the usual suspects of Norwegian black metal. And I suppose we might as well start with Mayhem. And it started with really tape trading and getting realistically, the rather unexceptional but pretty brutal Death Crush. Got live in Leipzig when it came out. But Demetrius Dom Satanas is still an incredible piece of work. The sound, the sonics, the incredible vocal precision of Attila. It stands as a monolith of black metal. And really, you can't really look much further than it. I will give Dark Throne, A Blaze in the Northern Sky is my favourite Dark Throne record. It could be Ephemeral Moon sometimes, but A Blaze in the Northern Sky is the one that just kicked everything back into gear somewhere in 92. Hearing In the Shadow of the Horns for the very first time, and realising here's a band who were embracing the Bathory, Venom, Celtic Frost spirit at a time when everything was becoming MTV death metal and, skateboarding shorts, and it was all getting very commercialized, and here was the sound of a band who wanted to drag it back to its primitive past. And there was a lot of people out there who just were willing this along, tape trading for black metal and tape trading black metal demos and scenes, and it felt like this was like the sharp end of the wedge that was just about to break open the scene. And In the Shadow of the Horns was the opening riff to that kind of, explosion or whatever you want to call it. Of course, there are lots of great Dark Throne records, but that one stands for me as one of my favourites. Third, I'm going to give it to Satyricon, The Shadow Throne. I like Dark Medieval Times a lot. I'm not a huge fan of what came after Shadow Throne. I like it. I like the new records. But The Shadow Throne just has something special about it. It's got a unique atmosphere, brilliant sonics, just great songwriting, great riffs, great dynamics. I don't like it as much as some of the others I'm mentioning, but it's some marginal gains, my friends. But Satyricon, The Shadow Throne, which recently was re-released as well in a kind of nice big package, is an incredible record. There's no way around it. And sort of, maybe it's my imagination that it has a sort of slightly pagan-y kind of vibe to it, but it's got something really special to it. Fourth has got to be Emperor and the Nightside Eclipse. I'll not mention them in order of what I prefer about them, but it's got to be in the Nightside Eclipse and the split EP. But in the Nightside Eclipse, I remember writing with Faust, and he sent me the demo and sent me 2 advanced tracks, and they were In O Satan and the Night Sky Majesty, and they just blew my mind, blew our fucking minds. I remember playing them to my friends and playing them to Primordial guys and being like, listen to this. And we listened to In O Satan, and we all just sat there in the rehearsal room somewhere in whatever it was in 93 and just listened to that song, and we were all just like in silence going, fucking hell, listen to that. And yeah, you can't deny it, Ishan, 17, 18 years old, whatever. So there's an awful lot of musical genius going on, and no matter how you splice it in this podcast, it's a little bit of a love-in for Norwegian black metal from that era. And so, yeah, it was great to see them play this at Greek Hallen again. But, yeah, in the Nightside Eclipse, what can you say? It's not a record I listen to a lot these days, as the orchestral kind of, that form of kind of slightly keyboard-drenched black metal left me behind a little bit as I became more, let's say, the Niflheims of this world speak to my soul a bit more than the, keyboards of the other, in parenthesis. But In the Nightside Eclipse is just, yeah, it's genius. It's an incredible record. Anthems I like a lot. After that, I kind of lost my way, but that first EP and the first album, yeah, genius. But at the end of the day, and to round out the podcast, coming right up to 40 minutes, my favourite Norwegian black metal band is Burzum. I make no apology for that. What can I say? Philosophem is just, for me, the kind of pinnacle of this internal debate that I've been having. It kind of represents the end of an era. That's sort of 95, 96. Things changed a lot after that when it comes to Norwegian black metal. But Philosophem sort of represents this sort of crude, ultra individualistic, I suppose, one man's take on black metal, and it hits a particular nerve, as does all of Burzum, and does many, and if not all of the records that I've mentioned. So there you go, my friends. I hope it was worth something to you. Some underrated Norwegian black metal gems in there. Agitators Anonymous, my middle-aged love letter to Norwegian black metal, and a homage to my 18-year-old. I don't know, whatever. What am I talking about? Who cares? Go and listen to some of the bands that I mentioned.